Every silo in this show runs on one sentence. Trust the people in charge, and you'll survive. That sentence has killed more people than the outside air ever has. B-roll. Silo exterior shot. Cafeteria crowd. Here's the thing about Silo that most breakdown videos get backwards. They treat it like a simple story about good guys hiding a scary truth from people who can't handle it. That's the show's own marketing pitch, actually. It's not the real story underneath it. The real story is about something much more familiar. It's about what happens when the people holding information decide, quietly and permanently, that keeping it is more important than sharing it. Today we're going to walk through exactly how Silo proves that point, scene by scene, generation by generation, all the way up through what's happening right now in Season 3. And by the end, I think you'll watch every for their own good line in the show completely differently. Let's get into it. Quick context if you're newer to the show. 10,000 people live underground in a silo, 140-some floors deep, because the surface world is supposedly poisoned beyond survival. Nobody remembers why they're down there. History past a certain point has been wiped clean, and the only real information about the outside comes from one source. The external sensors, run by IT, controlled by whoever holds the office of mayor and the head of IT. That's the entire government, really. Whoever controls the sensor controls what 10,000 people believe reality looks like. B-roll. Silo cross-section diagram. IT department. And the punishment for breaking the silo's biggest rule, saying you want to go outside, is that you actually get sent outside. It's called a cleaning. You put on a suit, you walk out the airlock, and you clean the camera lens with wool pads strapped to your arm before the suit fails and you die from what's out there. That's the mechanism. Now let's talk about what it's actually for. The official justification is simple. The outside is lethal. Showing people a false, pleasant image discourages them from trying to leave, which keeps them alive. Lying to save a life feels almost defensible, right up until you look closely at how that lie actually gets used. Watch what happens during an actual cleaning. The whole silo shows up. The cafeteria fills wall to wall. Screens go up. And what plays isn't a warning. It's not static or gray skies or anything that would make leaving look unappealing. It's green hills, blue sky, birds, a view of paradise, broadcast live, to the exact population you supposedly need to keep from wanting to leave. Sit with that for a second. If your entire goal is discouraging 10,000 people from walking out that door, you do not choose the most beautiful image imaginable as the last thing anyone ever sees before they die. And you absolutely do not project that image back to a packed room of people who are already suspicious about what's really out there. That single choice breaks the "it's for your protection" reading almost immediately. It's not designed to scare people out of leaving. It's designed to keep a room calm and a crowd from panicking while someone dies in front of them. That's crowd control, not public safety. Now, I want to be fair here because this only works as an argument if we don't pretend the danger is fake. It isn't. Holston dies within minutes of stepping outside. His wife, Allison, convinced the world couldn't really be what she'd been told, dies not long after him. Juliette, generations later, refuses to accept the official story either, and she survives, but barely, and not because the danger was overstated. Partway up the hill outside, her visor glitches, the illusion drops for a second, and what's underneath the false paradise is a genuinely dead, barren landscape. She keeps walking anyway, kept alive by nothing more than tape on a suit that was never built to last that long. So the surface really is hostile. Nobody in this show is inventing that part. What's being manufactured isn't the danger itself. It's everything wrapped around it. How much of the truth people get, who gets to see it, and who gets punished for asking. Before any of this becomes a philosophical argument about systems and control, it's a marriage. Holston and Allison loved each other. Allison finds something in an old hard drive that unsettles what she believes about where she lives, and instead of getting support, or an honest conversation, or literally any kind of help, she gets surveillance, isolation, exile, and death. Holston spends what's left of his life carrying that loss, knowing that even saying her name wrong in public could get him killed too. Two people who did nothing except notice something true. Whatever the system claims to protect, it clearly wasn't protecting them. And once you accept that, you have to ask the obvious follow-up question. If it's not protecting the people closest to the truth, What exactly is the visor for? The stated purpose of a cleaning is maintenance. Keep the external sensor clear so the silo can keep watching the world. But the image that sensor produces every single time is the same manufactured version of paradise, not the wasteland Juliette later confirms with her own eyes. That's not a maintenance function. That's a broadcast function. And it's not only the visor. Past the wasteland Juliette walks through, there's an entire buried network of other silos that nobody she grew up with has ever heard of. Think about that for a second. Hiding the existence of other communities living the exact same underground life a short walk away has nothing to do with keeping anyone from dying outside. That information can't hurt you. It can only threaten a story. You see the same pattern on a smaller scale with Ed Harwood, the head of mechanical. He spends his career reading where patterns and tunnels most residents will never even walk through. And what that word tells him puts the silo's real age at something closer to 300 years. Well past the number taught as official history. Nobody with the authority to correct that record has any interest in doing it. The truth just sits in the rock, buried on purpose. None of that is about survival. It's about deciding permanently what the world is allowed to look like from the inside. Here's where I want to actually steelman the other side because there's a real historical case buried in this show, and it deserves more than a dismissal. 140 years before Juliette becomes sheriff, a rebellion from the lower levels nearly forces the airlock open, threatening to flood the entire silo with outside air. In the chaos, every book, every hard drive, nearly all pre-silo history gets destroyed. The official record blames the rebels for burning their own past. The truth is closer to the opposite. The mayor running things at the time, Salvador Quinn, ordered that purge himself, then had a memory-suppressing compound worked into the water supply. Here's the detail that actually matters. Before that purge, uprisings had been happening roughly every 20 years, and the show ties that cycle directly to people remembering that history had happened before, that a revolt had almost worked once already. After Quinn wiped it out, the cycle stopped completely. 140 years pass before anything close to that scale happens again, which is basically the entire gap between that rebellion and where Juliette's story begins. So when Bernard, generations later, argues that secrecy is necessary for survival, he's not making that up. The silo's own history genuinely supports him on the narrow question of whether shared knowledge fuels revolt. It does. It did. But look at what else that fix accomplished while it was solving that problem. It also made Quinn's own department the last remaining authority on what actually happened, permanently. Every mayor and every head of IT since has inherited a monopoly on the truth that traces back to one man's emergency decision a century and a half ago. A monopoly that has badly outlived the emergency that created it. And Quinn himself gets remembered publicly as the official who failed to prevent the destruction, when the evidence says he's the one who engineered it. That kind of blame management doesn't happen by accident, that it's not even improvised. The founders left behind an actual standing procedure for exactly this situation. Let unrest vent. Reorganize whatever needs reorganizing. Settle on a scapegoat the crowd can blame instead of the people actually in charge. Mechanical draws that roll more than any other department in the silo, which tells you exactly which residents were considered expendable the moment leadership needed someone to take the fall. A system that ships with a pre-written script for managing its own uprisings was built by people who assumed the uprisings would keep coming. And then there's the detail that stops this from being about managing panic and turns it into something colder. Every silo, this one included, was constructed with something called the safeguard. Real plumbing, built into the walls from day one, designed to flood the entire structure with poison gas if a rebellion ever gets far enough that nothing else can stop it. In Silo 17, it almost fires. The only reason it doesn't is two engineers capping the pipe themselves, on their own initiative, with their young son watching closely enough to remember it decades later. Think about what that says. The founders' actual contingency plan for a population getting too close to the truth is a pipe engineered to kill every person breathing that air. When a system's fallback plan looks like that, you already know what it exists to protect, and it isn't the 10,000 people living inside it. None of this requires anyone running the silo to be cartoonishly evil, and I think that's actually the more disturbing read. Bernard genuinely seems to believe he's the only person steady enough to carry a truth this heavy without the whole place falling apart. And he's not entirely wrong that revealing everything at once would be dangerous, not after what almost happened the one time the truth nearly got out. But believing that doesn't require the specific tools he reaches for. Hidden surveillance, memory-altering drugs, exiling Juliette instead of simply losing a vote. And once Bernard is gone, none of that machinery disappears with him. Robert Sims inherits pieces of it. His own wife Camille gets cleared for a vault that Robert and their son are turned away from, given access to something neither of them has been told about outright. The people running the system keep changing. What gets passed down never does. You can watch the same pattern happening right now, just smaller. Paul Billings, arguably the most rule-abiding character in the entire show, becomes the person quietly editing the pact itself, the founding document the whole silo treats as scripture. A rulebook that gets rewritten by whoever's currently enforcing it isn't a fixed inheritance from wiser founders. It's a tool. And the fact that it's the character who believes hardest in the rules doing the editing tells you exactly how little belief protects anyone from becoming what the position needs them to be. I want to give the other side its full due here, because the fear in this show is not purely invented. At the end of Season 2, a faction inside Silo 18 gets close enough to actually opening their own vault and walking outside, convinced by nothing more than the fact that Juliette made it over the hill and survived. Juliette has to send a warning back just to stop them, and it arrives with almost no room to spare. That is a real case of partial hope turning into something that could have killed a room full of people within minutes. It's not a hypothetical invented after the fact to justify the system. If you want to argue this whole setup is simple imprisonment, that near miss deserves a real answer, not a shrug, which is exactly why what happens next matters so much. This is where I want to add something most breakdowns skip, because Season 3 actually escalates this whole argument in a way worth digging into. Juliette comes back from the outside with the one thing this system should theoretically want most: confirmed, first-hand knowledge of what's really out there. If the silo genuinely runs on protecting people through informed caution, she's the best asset it could possibly have. Someone who could settle the argument honestly instead of managing it forever. Instead, she gets drugged, something called vitamin D+, worked into what she's given to eat under the excuse of recovering from the fire she survived at the end of Season 2, quietly erasing the exact stretch of memory that would let her act on what she learned. And here's what makes Season 3 genuinely interesting rather than just a repeat. This isn't Bernard's old-fashioned water supply trick. It's controlled by something called the algorithm, an AI system that's been quietly running IT's decision-making, and it's precise enough now to target one person instead of dosing an entire population. The flashback storyline this season traces exactly where that drug came from. It leads back to a woman named Charlotte, who lost her memory after a mission gone wrong long before the silos existed, treated by a doctor whose experiments in selectively erasing memory become the direct ancestor of what's now being fed to Juliette. So the show is deliberately drawing a straight line from Quinn's crude, population-wide purge 140 years earlier to a chemical descendant of it precise enough to erase one specific person's specific memories and nothing else. And Juliette isn't just a passive victim of it either. As she starts noticing gaps in her own memory, she quietly stops swallowing the pills, and fragments start coming back to her anyway, triggered by people and places connected to her old life. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the silo, Lucas has been decoding old files and discovers that this isn't even the first time the water supply itself has been contaminated with a memory-suppressing compound. Which means the show isn't treating Quinn's purge as ancient history anymore. It's treating it as a design pattern the current leadership already knew about and was willing to use again. That's the real escalation. The system isn't just protecting an old secret anymore. It's actively refining the exact tool it uses to protect itself, generation after generation, getting more targeted and more deniable each time it gets used. So here's the test I keep coming back to. And once you see it, you can't unsee it in this show. Watch what the people running the silo do in the exact moments where telling the truth would cost them nothing except their own control. On the visor, on the existence of the other silos, on the real age of the place, sitting quietly in Harwood's readings, on Quinn's actual legacy, on a rulebook that gets rewritten the moment rewriting it becomes convenient, on Juliette's memory, right now, in the present storyline. Every single time, the system picks control. And every single time, the reason has less to do with anyone getting physically hurt in that exact moment, and everything to do with protecting a grip on power that's been the real point since long before anyone currently in charge was even born. I don't think that erases what Quinn's original fix actually accomplished. 140 years without another uprising reaching the airlock is a genuinely real result, and the people who inherited that system have real reasons, backed by an actual body count, to believe secrecy works. But working, and being good for the people living under it, are two completely different claims. And the silos have never had to prove the second one, because nobody has ever gotten close enough to the full picture to actually test it. A system that's genuinely built around protecting people doesn't design a way to kill all of them as its last resort. That single detail tells you everything about what's really being protected here. The danger outside is real, and it just happens to be a convenient enough reason to make every other layer of control look justified by association. The visor. The buried silos. The tunnels reading 300 years older than the official record. A pact quietly rewritten by whoever happens to be holding it. A pipe capped just in time by two parents who weren't even supposed to have that choice. And now, a cup in front of Juliette with something in it that isn't a vitamin. Every one of those threads leads back to the same place. This system was never built to survive the outside. It was built to survive its own secret. And calling that protection was always the easiest way to get everyone underground to keep drinking. If you think I'm being too harsh on Bernard or too easy on Quinn, put it in the comments. I actually want the argument. And if you want the next one on what the algorithm actually is and how much control it really has over Silo 18, that's coming, so get subscribed for it.